Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're technologically challenged, as is every single meeting that we've had for the last 2 years in the entire world, but that's okay. We will get there from here. I'm Ashburn Supervisor Mike Turner here in Loudoun County, and today's panel discussion and Q&A is on commercial property assessed clean energy program, and it's really a 101. It's an introductory session to kind of introduce business owners, commercial property owners to the many, what we believe are very significant advantages of commercial property assessed clean energy. Virginia has a fairly fresh ordinance about CPACE, as we like to call it, and that's being fine-tuned even as we speak down in the legislature. So there's a lot moving on the Virginia CPACE front. And so the panel discussion today is going to give you an introductory primer on the CPACE, and then we will open it up for any questions. We have 3 panelists this morning. Very briefly, Abby Johnson is the Executive Director and Founder of the Virginia PACE Authority and President of Abacus Property Solutions. And I will give you a more detailed introduction here in just a second as I introduce her to provide her presentation. And she will be our first speaker. Our second speaker is Ms. Karen Priestman. She's a Senior Vice President for Gladstone Commercial Corporation, which is and she's been very involved in the CPACE program and her work with that organization. And finally, Mr. Gerry Gurgick is the President and Principal of G2EM, doing business as Energy Target Zero. He is the founder of Loudoun PACE and also a Loudoun County Chamber member, we're proud to say. And so I will give a more detailed introduction to each of them as we go through the session. And our format this morning will be that I will hand it off to each of the 3 panelists. They will do a short presentation, and at the conclusion of their presentation, I will introduce the next panelist, and we'll go through all 3 panelists for their presentations. And then when we're done, we will circle back around and we will ask some questions and invite you to ask some questions as well. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Abby Johnson, as I said, the Executive Director and Founder of the Virginia PACE Authority and President of Abacus Property Solutions. Since 2012, Abby has specialized in PACE financing, advising commercial building owners, lenders, and public sector clients in PACE project and program management. She's been instrumental in developing PACE programs around the country through crafting of PACE legislation, creating program guidelines, and launching and administering PACE programs. In her capacity as an advisor, Abby works with building owners to develop PACE-able projects, structure PACE within the capital stack, and source senior debt as needed. Prior to specializing in PACE, Abby worked for over 15 years in commercial real estate in the US and Europe as an architect, management consultant, and commercial mortgage banker. She's a recipient of numerous awards at both the state and national level and has been successful in garnering numerous grants around energy efficiency and resiliency. Abby is active in supporting affordable housing, sustainability, and economic development, evidenced by her service as a board member of Virginia Housing, PACE Nation, the Mid-Atlantic PACE Alliance, and Wahoos for Sustainability. She has a Bachelor of Architectural History from the University of Virginia and a Master's in Business from Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. And before I hand it off to Abby, I just want to let everyone know that if you have questions, just click on your chat button and enter the question in the chat. I will keep track of those, and I will come back around when we're ready. I'll provide those questions as each speaker finishes. And with that, Abby, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks a lot for your work in Loudoun and beyond in terms of supporting PACE. We really appreciate that. There's very few elected officials at the local level that have done what you have done. So thanks again for your advocacy. And with that, I'm just going to do a kind of a 101. Some of you may have heard of it before, but I think it's always good to have a refresher and also put in the context of where we are today in 2022. So I'm going to share my screen. And for the sake of my own being able to see what's going on, I may not put it into slideshow mode. So if you all have problems seeing it, just let me know. Does this work okay for you all? Sometimes it's easier for me to keep it out of slideshow. Can you all see the screens? The Say Virginia PACE Authority? Can someone let me know? Just confirm. Mike, can you confirm that? You see the screen? Well, I'm going to assume yes until I hear someone tell me I do not. So as Mike said, we are.
You're good, Abby. Sorry, I couldn't find my microphone or my video when I was looking at the
Okay,
slides.
just
You're
wanted to
good.
confirm this since we're having technological issues, I just want to make sure. So anyway, yeah, as Mike kind of gave a detailed introduction, but just to kind of clarify, we've been involved in PACE a long time in Virginia, and I've been involved with PACE before it became active in Virginia. But exciting news is that this fall we were selected to be the state administrator for CPACE, and what that means is we have lots of local programs, including Loudoun and also Fairfax County adjacent, that have PACE programs and have been kind of opened up basically during the pandemic. So fairly fresh, as he said, but we also have the ability now to have other localities just opt in to a state structure, and in potentially Loudoun as well may be interested in doing that, because in that way we'll have one set of standardized legal documents, admin documents, program guide, et cetera. And it's just always easier when you have one place to go versus, a number of places. So we're excited about that opportunity and excited about working within the Loudoun community to bring PACE to your business or your development. So with that, I'll just give a brief overview about the opportunities with PACE. Basically, we think it's about $3 billion now. There's been a lot of projects that have happened. There's the largest project, even larger than the $90 million one in New York City. There's another one over $100 million that was just financed in California for a hospital. So it just PACE portion. So PACE is definitely getting a lot of people's attention, and we're seeing exponential growth over the last few years on the commercial side. And as it, of course, has the financing numbers go up and up, it also has collateral effects in terms of job creation, both through construction and just contractors and energy auditors who are doing the work of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and also really helps local economies with increased building values, more efficient buildings, helps draw businesses to an area that has PACE, because it's a way to create and develop better buildings. Also, there's the reason for PACE was created in the first place was certainly to find a financial vehicle that worked to allow for cleaner buildings, for more efficient buildings, those that also are better for the environment. So basically, what it is a kind of financing that offers 100% upfront for eligible projects and properties. We accept both new construction and existing buildings. So for an existing building, if you have a retrofit, it would cover typically, if it's 100% of the eligible measures of that project. If it's a new construction project, it's going to cover a portion of the whole capital stack. It does not fund 100% of the whole project, but it's something that's very attractive because that's really very difficult to find today. In Virginia, particularly, we have broad eligibility of project type. So as long as your project is saving energy over what you have today, or what the baseline construction code says you have to have for a new development, you're going to be eligible. And that is, anything from upgrade HVAC, lighting, hot water, controls. We see all sorts of interesting waste to energy projects in the ag space, water conservation of any type. I think about the wineries in Loudoun that I've actually been to, and how much water they use. And a lot of that also would be PACE eligible. Certainly renewable, you think of solar, you think of wind. Also, you think of battery storage, you think of microgrids. All these things are eligible for CPACE. We also, a few years ago, were able to get resiliency and stormwater management onto our eligibility list. And that means you can think about, reducing runoff on your property through, bioswales or, pervious pavement, green roofs, blue roofs. You can think about French drains. You can think about maybe even helping pay for part of a retention pond. So really, there's a lot of things. I think if you think about your project and how you want to upgrade it, come to us and ask us a question, and we'll tell you if it's not, because we think it most likely will be. In terms of property type, as Mike said, it's commercial property assessed clean energy, or CPACE, which means that basically it includes everything but single family residential 1 to 4 units. we've looked at and considered at the state level. Mike and I were part of a state advisory board that looked at whether or not it's a good idea to have residential PACE. And right now we decided no, but it's something that's, on the table and not put in the drawer at this point in time. But for right now in Loudoun and the rest of Virginia, everything but single family 1 to 4 units. I think what's exciting about CPACE is in addition to the 100% financing, you also have the fact that the interest rates are becoming more and more competitive. We're seeing a growing list of PACE lenders that are in the market. Particularly, we're seeing a lot of community banks that are coming and excited about adding PACE to their suite of products. So as this evolves, I know rates now are in the 5s, but we anticipate that they will go down. They're also very long term. So really, unless you're talking about some kind of HUD products, it's very hard to get 30 years fixed rates. So that's something also that not only allows for, a peace of mind because it's fixed. Also, these long terms mean, your payments yearly would be lower. Also, there is the ability to, because the property is really the underwriting is on the property and not on the borrower. There is, by nature of the way PACE works, there are no personal or corporate guarantees, which I'll describe why that mechanism is that way in a second. One other thing I think is exciting about our program is that we have the ability to refinance measures that are already installed. So say you did a huge, you put a solar array on your roof last year and you're like, oh, well, I already paid for it. I already paid cash or even I did some kind of loan I'm going to have to pay on. We can look at basically making sure that solar is going to be still eligible, but basically determining eligibility and say, okay, if you want, we can start, the PACE loan today will have a year or less in terms of term. This term is based on the useful life, but you can still pull out some cash and finance it through PACE. So that's something we're seeing used a lot around the country, and we're excited it's now available in Virginia. Basically, it is a public-private partnership. It's private in the sense you have private PACE lenders, that range from specialty firms that just do PACE financing to community banks that provide this, and other kinds of banking institutions that provide capital for your project. And you are really providing this financing, which we do call them Virginia loans, to private borrowers. Now, the borrowers can be, nonprofit organizations because they're not public. And the reason why that's something that I typically note is that why you get this great kind of financing is because it's secured by a voluntary special assessment on your property. So I, property owner, borrower, say to Loudoun County, I want to place a special assessment on the property to obtain this type of financing called CPACE. And I'm willing then to pay it back over the term that's been agreed to between me and the lender for this many years. And if I don't pay it back, the county has a mechanism by which it'll be enforced. So that kind of county non-financial, but county kind of structure of government is what enables this kind of financing to exist. And this is the way it is generally around the country. So it also means that, because it is a special assessment lien, treated the same way as a real property tax in terms of collection, it means that it doesn't go away. So that's another thing that lenders love. It's like, okay, I sell my building, there has to be, I have to, basically the debt that's there is extinguished. It has to get a new loan. This stays with the property if you want it to. So if it's a 20-year PACE loan, then it will stay with the property until it's fully paid. If you want to prepay it, you can do that. That's an agreement between you and the CPACE lender. The terms, frankly, don't look that different than what you see on a commercial bank loan in terms of when you can prepay and how you prepay. But there's also that comfort that if you really want to have this, this low payment for a number of years, you can. It doesn't accelerate, it transfers. So this is something that I think also brings comfort to those who are lending, but also could be a benefit for those who are the owners, depending on the situation. So I think what's also really important for this group to understand or to see about PACE is its potential. I think Gerry's going to bring specific comments about Loudoun, but I just want to say that we have a new study out nationally, part of the board of PACE Nation, which is the organization that basically espouses the value of PACE around the country and provides education as well. And basically they did a study that showed what the potential is for PACE if it was used to a certain degree. So in this case, if 15% of the buildings in Virginia were financed with CPACE, you can see that it would create an enormous economic impact of over 30 billion, as well as create many, many jobs. And this is based on calculators that they have that are based on reality and what we're seeing throughout the market. So it's something that is exciting to see as a potential. And then think about how large Loudoun is as a county, how wealthy it is really, and how kind of the economic engines that really drive the county economy, and how this could be pretty sizable figure as well for the county alone. So I also just want to point out a few ways you would use CPACE, and then I'm going to let it go to our next speaker. I think Karen, whom I've known for a long time, she will bring some great perspective from the owner. But I'll just kind of give you a high level of the different ways that you would typically use CPACE. So the first one would be in a retrofit. I kind of alluded to it before. You have an older building or you're buying a building and you need to upgrade it. How can PACE help? Well, it can pay for a broad range of upgrades, like kind of listed the types of eligible measures. I welcome that you go to virginiapace.com and download the Loudoun, go to Loudoun County and download the program guide, and that will give you in the back kind of a laundry list of typical measures that we see. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good way to see, oh yeah, I didn't think about the fact that I could include this. And that's a way to kind of get also the juices flowing in terms of kinds of projects you may want to or see the need to do in your building. But basically, by doing projects or having new equipment that is more efficient, that results in lower operating costs, that results in less maintenance, can actually increase building value in addition to reducing your operating costs and therefore increasing your cash flow. So, you're putting in equipment that you need. You're not paying anything for it up front. So you're using your those reserves or that cash for other uses. If you're an owner occupied building and you're manufacturing I don't know, some kind of equipment, then you can pay for payroll. You can use that cash for buying more equipment that you're selling versus having to use it to replace the HVAC units on your roof, for example, or to install new lighting. So basically, sorry about that. That is something that if you think about this, the standpoint of being a building owner, this is how PACE can help. Also, I think something that some building owners can use it for is off balance sheet, meaning that it's treated as a short-term liability as an operating expense and not as a long-term liability. And that's something you have to discuss with your CPA, but it's something that I think is good to keep in mind as you look at your particular asset. Also, in some situations, we've seen that depending on the lease type, if you are replacing the HVAC or roof or something that's considered common, or the lighting in the parking lot, and typically some of those costs will be passed through to your tenants, or couldn't be passed through tenants actually in a typical scenario, but PACE is considered in the same bundle as the real property tax. You can, depending on your lease, have that portion of the cost of the CPACE financing pass through to that tenant. If the tenant will say, well, I don't want to pay a part of this this lighting upgrade for the parking lot, but you can say, well, now that we've installed all LEDs, the common area costs are going to go down, and therefore you're really going to be net positive in terms of the cost. So I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but just to say there's lots of ways to use CPACE. Another way that we're seeing used more and more is actually with new developments or gut rehabs, where you're really going in to a shell. If it's a gut rehab and you have to kind of recreate everything, you're changing the use, or ground up construction. We see often, as this picture shows, new hotels will use PACE as part of their capital stack. And in this case, if you can pull out and demonstrate that certain measures are eligible per the PACE program guide, then you can actually have them financed at 100%. And this basically then replaces your own equity or cash, or having to bring potentially in other investors, or using other more expensive kinds of what we call mezz debt or preferred equity. So we're seeing a lot of developers. I had one call me 2 days ago and said, hey, when's PACE going to be available in this jurisdiction? It was Loudoun, because with the rising costs of materials, we really have a gap in our financing. And we really think that PACE, we have the kind of project where there'll be enough PACE eligible measures that will really help reduce our out of pocket and make our return on investment really pencil. So we see this as more and more something that all different kinds of developers are using. Okay, Karen, I'm going to leave it to you and go on mute.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Abby, thank you for including me in the panel, and Loudoun, thank you for having the panel and allowing Abby to invite me to join.
Karen, before you dive in, let me give you your intro. I want to have everybody know who you are and give you some background, rather than just a quick brush I gave you. So if you just wait for just 1 second. Karen is a Senior Vice President for Gladstone Commercial Corporation. Ms. Priestman joined Gladstone Commercial in 2018 and has profit and loss responsibility for a portfolio of approximately 4 million square feet of office and industrial properties across the Midwest, with top line revenue of more than $34 million. This entails operational and financial performance at more than 30 properties across the Midwest, making all decisions at the property level, including developing and then implementing all property business plans, including selection of necessary team members, property managers, architects, brokers, etc. Capital expenditure choices, lease negotiations, and dispositions. Previous positions include Vice President of Prudential Real Estate Investors, Director of Carr Real Estate Services, Vice President of Hager Pacific Properties, and Principal of K2M LLC, as well as several investment syndicates. She has transacted more than $1 billion of real estate, managed investment portfolios as large as $1 billion, and developed a trophy office building in Washington, D.C. She received her Bachelor of Science with great distinction in civil engineering from California State University, Long Beach, and an MBA in real estate and finance from the Wharton School. She also has acquired and manages a diverse, personally owned portfolio of commercial real estate with holdings in 4 states, including industrial, multifamily, and retail assets. Take it away, Karen. Thank you.
Wow, that was quite a nice introduction there. As stated, I'm Karen Priestman with Gladstone Commercial. Gladstone Commercial is a real estate investment trust. Our market cap is about $1 billion. We have about 120 assets. So we are a big national owner of commercial real estate, about half in the office sector and about half in the industrial sector. And I've had the pleasure of doing several PACE financings, a couple of them actually with Abby. For those of you that are not familiar, as a real estate investment trust or a REIT, we don't get tax benefits. We're not taxed at the corporate level, but other aspects of PACE make it a really powerful tool for us, and that's why we've taken advantage of it. What I really like about it is it's truly a win for everybody. The landlord wins, the tenant wins, the environment wins, the county wins, everybody wins. And it's not often that, you get such alignment of agenda between everybody. Being on the user side, I thought I would very quickly show on this slide the process and how this works and how the decisions are made. This will show you that we typically get kind of an a la carte menu. We have an advisor come in, they look at the building for energy saving opportunities. And this is typically done in conjunction with a life cycle event. So we're needing to replace all the HVAC. It's reached the end of its useful life. Maybe it's replacing the roof. Maybe it's doing a complete rehab, as Abby discussed. But they come in and they give me this list and they say, here are the different items you could improve, and here's the savings it would get you. And then as you see at the bottom, it tells us what the environmental benefits are. So you can go down this list and say, this makes sense, that doesn't. One of the things that gets involved is sort of the payback period, which is off to the far right. But this is something you would walk through with your consultant and start making decisions about which item you want to tackle with the PACE financing. An interesting thing you might note on this particular one is that our tenant had older hoods in their labs, which are very big energy drains. And so they came in and said, how about if we tag along and you borrow the money for us to upgrade our hoods to something more energy efficient? And we were able to make that happen. And as a result, not only were they happy, but we're happy, because in order for them to commit to paying back the loan, we ended up with a longer lease term. So it was really, really a great opportunity for us. And we helped our tenant meet their ESG goals by wrapping in the update, but it didn't cost anything for me, the landlord. It created great tenant relations, and it got us a lease extension. Again, everybody wins. So Abby, if you want to go on to the next slide, just very briefly going through from an ownership standpoint, why we think this is a good thing, or has been a good thing for us to do on our properties. We all in life want to do the right thing on everything, but at the same time, a REIT we have to think about shareholder return and use of capital. So sort of like at your house, or my house, would I like my husband and I to each drive an all electric car, have solar on the roof, have a rain barrel on the roof to catch rainwater so we don't use so much water? Sure, everything's great. It's all good for the environment, but there is a financial balance that has to be struck, an economic balance that must be struck. And so for landlords, in the case of my portfolio, my tenants all pay for the utility. I only cover the cost of utilities when my building's vacant. But as long as the tenant's there, they get the benefit of any utility savings. I, as the landlord, do not. So PACE comes in and says, look, we can help you make the choice to go to a more expensive piece of equipment that will save energy, that otherwise I would have to write a check for that. So in an easy example, these numbers are not necessarily accurate, but a standard HVAC system's $500,000. But if you upgrade it and upgrade your controls for that system, the cost may go up to $750,000. By using PACE, I don't have to write a check for any of that $750,000. And the payback on that loan of $750,000 is paid through supplemental real estate taxes, as Abby has described. We take a very open book approach with our tenants, and we set the term of the loan to ensure that the energy savings are greater than the increase in taxes, so that my tenant still comes out ahead. So I save myself having to write a capital check or go borrow from my line or whatever. It has no cash impact on me. At the same time, I'm benefiting my tenants with a lower occupancy cost, because yes, their real estate taxes went up, but their energy costs went down by more than that increase in the real estate tax. And that is how we at Gladstone tend to look at what term on the loan we want. Typically, as Abby said, you can get them up to 30 years, and that's great. That gets you the lowest payment. But we want to make sure that from day one, our tenant is being benefited. And a 30-year loan, I might have 6 tenants over that amount of time. So matching it up with my current tenancy and keeping them happy is a priority for us as we communicate with our tenants. And so that is the way we choose the terms on, on Gladstone projects. And as I just discussed, you get a better outcome for the property because you can justify, for instance, putting in a much more robust control system. And that control system now means that your HVAC runs better, the climate is better, and you get much better comfort control for your tenants. So again, another plus for the tenant that came at no cost to the landlord. There's a better outcome for the environment, which I think is pretty obvious. And you saw on the previous slide that it can be easily quantified. And I share that with my tenants. And then it helps both the landlord and the tenant hit their ESG targets. I'm sure you've been hearing about the big push in this area. It just even in the last 6 months. So both from a corporate standpoint, for both us as a REIT and for my tenants, it helps them meet those goals. It's positive. And we invite our tenants to put out press releases that, look what a great thing we're doing for this county and for our employees. And finally, employee retention, which I know sounds a little kooky, but if you know millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Yers, they really, really want to be part of a green organization. It does make a difference in their decision about where to go to work. So especially in this current really tough hiring and retention environment, being able to say, we've done these things and taken on this extra real estate tax burden in order to operate more energy efficiently, it's seen as a real positive. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's considering PACE and hear about, both what went well and what was more challenging and how much time it takes, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll turn it back over now to our next speaker.
Thank you, Karen, very much. And everyone, we have no questions. Someone did ask if we're going to share this presentation. We will make sure, and if we can, Ashley White, if we can make sure that we announce to everybody at the end of the session here how we can get that out to them, that'd be helpful. But our intent is to send this out to everybody. Our final panelist is Mr. Gerry Gurgick. He is the president and principal of G2EM, doing business as Energy Target Zero. He's the founder of Loudoun PACE and also a long and illustrious member of the Loudoun Chamber of Commerce. In response to a changing climate and a sense of obligation to future generations, Gerry Gurgick is a committed participant in the regional drive to add PACE to local jurisdictions to finance energy efficiency for private real estate. With more than 20 years of real estate development experience, including construction vice president for Kettler, a leading multifamily developer in Northern Virginia, he is fully aware of the lack of capital for true energy efficiency and the resulting increase in building-related fossil fuel use. That's why he sees PACE as the only workable choice available. Since 2010, he's been working to develop the local PACE program in Loudoun County. He started a nonprofit, Loudoun PACE, and has been instrumental in leading PACE initiatives of the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Authority, the Washington Airports Task Force, AOBA, and REHAU, an international corporation with North American headquarters in Leesburg, Virginia. Additionally, he's organized meetings with stakeholders supporting PACE for the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and has lobbied in Richmond for broadened scope for PACE to include residential properties, stormwater management, and conservation easements. Since Gerry understands what it takes to compete and develop projects for local market conditions and deliver on time and on budget, providing the needed capital funding for incorporating energy efficiency and energy production through PACE programs is essential. Past development projects included a 2,000-acre project now called Potomac Shores in Dumfries, Port Potomac in Woodbridge, a 28-story condo in Midtown Bethesda North, in Rockville, Maryland, and many more projects in the region. He performed land development work at National Harbor and project management work for the revitalization of downtown Silver Spring, restoration of the AFI Silver Theater for the Peterson Companies. As vice president for Bank of America, he developed Oreo assets. His career journey started in the structural engineering field, where he designed over 6 million square feet of hotels, offices, and industrial structures in Atlanta, San Francisco, Detroit, Tampa, Baltimore, and Singapore. Gerry graduated from New Jersey Institute of Technology, has an MBA in refinance from George Mason University, and has also completed master's studies in architectural engineering at the Pennsylvania State University. Please welcome Gerry Gurgick.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. Hopefully we can now start sharing the screen. I'll leave the slides this way. If you were my best friend, this is what I would want you to really understand about PACE. It's pretty unique. Ashley, are you controlling this? Next slide. No? Okay. You know, as a green financial innovation, one of the PACE lenders describes it as a completely new form of capital. And since it's not your cash and it's not equity, it's non-recourse, non-participating investment by the local government, it is not really borrowing. Because it's secured by the PACE program, it offers the longest term and therefore the lowest payment for any energy investment. It's secured by the program and can be 100% paid for by energy savings. So PACE provides the great and. If you are considering that your business needs to expand inventory, improve the front office area, you're a hotel and you need to change all the carpeting and linens and silverware out, and you're going to do an energy efficiency project, now you can do both. So PACE gives you an and. It serves your ESG goals, as Karen highlighted, and it does not cause your lender to subordinate to the PACE loan. Recently, I was working with a Loudoun client, and their lender told him that he had to subordinate to the entire amount of the PACE loan, and that's just an inaccuracy. It's really payments in arrears, and that's important to really understand. And so I share that with you because you're my best friend. Next slide. This is something I discovered, and I was pretty fascinated by it, and I hope it interests you. That businesses go around looking at fixing their offering, and the light shaded color is the return on investment versus where you spend your money. And you can see that fixing your offering isn't nearly as productive as doing something new and innovative in financing. That the time spent on it is little and the returns are great. And PACE is that sort of tool. Next slide, please. Some of the great quotes that I've enjoyed reading over the years in articles are, PACE is one of the top 20 world-changing ideas per Scientific American, and Harvard Business Review recognized PACE as one of its top breakthrough ideas in 2010. So it's been around a while. If you haven't heard of it, it's really a great innovation. And I want to highlight that with the next slide. Here's a great example because the LA Hilton outside of Universal Studios discovered that they could invest $7 million and that would produce an annual savings in operations and energy expenses of $1 million. Now, 7 million divided by 1 million is a 7-year payback. That's not good enough for most corporate entities, and so it would not happen. But what they also found was that they could get a 20-year, $665,000 a year PACE payment. And since that's not their cash, it's not their equity, and it's not borrowing, their return on investment was a net of $335,000 a year for no investment. So that's an infinite return on investment to them, not necessarily the project, but at least their return is infinite. It increased the value of the asset because 7 million was invested. It also, on the net income, if you use a cap rate of 5%, I think you get 6.7 million. So the value of the building went up by $13.5 million with zero investment. And there are other alternatives that this presents, like you could add charging stations that may have no returns, but you could afford to fund that in that PACE program and still do well. Interestingly, it turned out that they actually saved $1.1 million a year, and so their returns were even greater. Next slide, please. You know, I know that who we're looking for in Loudoun are innovators. I hope everyone on this call is an innovator and wants to move early on PACE. And I wanted to share with you the other innovators that I'm talking to in Loudoun on the next slide. And all of these folks are at least interested in exploring PACE, and some are at various stages. But with Brian Cullen, he's still looking at it for Virginia Village project. I'm working with Shai Gilad at Leesburg Airport Hangar for ProJet Aviation. St. David's Episcopal Church is going ahead with their project. They're still trying to get their arms around PACE, and I work with Alan and Liz. I've been talking to Min Lee for about 4 or 5 years now, and if the Gramercy District goes ahead, I'm kind of I'm pretty certain that they will use PACE in their project. Also, if you're familiar with Leesburg and you've talked to Peter Burnett or are aware of his project at 338 East Market Street, it's going to be a net zero building. And I think, unfortunately, Peter was advised that his lender would not subordinate to the entire PACE amount, and therefore it didn't turn out to be a PACE project. Nevertheless, I did consult with him and help him develop it. Next slide, please. So I want to reiterate that PACE is not your cash, it's not equity, it's not a loan, it's a special assessment. Simply a surtax. It is a neighborhood of one property, yours, that gets a special assessment. And it pays for specific infrastructure benefiting the community environmentally. The infrastructure is chosen by you, the lender is chosen by you, the interest rate is up to you, and you can check out the definition in Investopedia. Next slide, please. So PACE is still just an assessment, and it should be treated the same as your real estate tax, Route 28 tax, Silver Line taxes, Greenlee Bridge. Maybe you have a water sewer tax paying for improvements, sometimes downtown improvement district, and PACE. They're all the same. The only one that's really unique is since the PACE assessment is designed by you and results in physical improvements to your property, but it can also result in direct cash savings annually. And so it's the only one that benefits you cash-wise. Next slide, please. I have done analyses for simply solar panels in Loudoun County. Loudoun County is a little bit special in terms of Virginia and solar panels. So for all the rooftops listed, I've done some analysis, and this is generally what I see. You can see that there's no investment for the blue line, and that's PACE financing. And yet it's cash flow positive for all 20 years. Oh, I'm sorry, all 30 years. You do have to have a good guarantee on the solar panels to get that kind of financing. The other two have negative returns, and you break even in year 7 and 9 versus using cash or typical loan that might be a 5-year loan. You can do this any way you want to, and only PACE allows you to get paid every year for adding solar panels to these large roofs. Next slide, please. So PACE not only helps these large roofs, but here's a winery that did a net zero energy bill. Next slide. Folks have used it. The Whitney restaurants, the Detroit Icon. We have a few iconic restaurants in Loudoun, Tuskie's, Lightfoot, Magnolia. There's a lot of great restaurants, Clyde's. They could probably use PACE investments to get more energy efficient. Next slide. Once I've looked at several times at the town of Middleburg and Leesburg. Here's a downtown shot of Purcellville. What I see is an eligible PACE project on every single building on this street, and this goes from Route 7 over toward Magnolia. But every single one of those could have a PACE project and probably be net zero. Next slide. Here's an example of what I did on a hotel project in Florida. I did PACE at level 1 and PACE at level 2. What level 2 was adding solar panels and really going all in on geothermal and better insulation in the building. So naturally it cost more. But the PACE level of investment was increased for the higher cost development, and yet the IRR to the developer, because PACE is non-participating, non-recourse money, the IRR to the developer on a 5-year hold went up by 136%, and that's hard to achieve any other way, and that's why PACE is so innovative and such a good thing to do. Next slide, please. I'm always trying to figure out if what I'm saying is true or believe is true. So here's an example where I just wanted to look at, if you spent up to $8 on insulation, what would that do? And that better insulation reduces the tonnage of AC enough on a typical code compliant project to where the overall 5-year operational cost is least with the highest insulation and dropping the tonnage of AC down to 1.25 tons instead of 5 tons on the same house. I currently live in a house that just happens to pretty much coincide with these figures. I wish I could have persuaded the developer to use foam insulation, but I couldn't. So I'm kind of stuck here trying to figure out what to do next. Then I went and I looked at changing the AC systems from a regular 5-ton system for a 2,500 square foot building to geothermal systems. And I found out that the lowest cost, especially with a PACE program, would be the 1.25 ton with the high insulation levels. And why is that important? Next slide, please. Oh, okay. Then this one also shows that the lowest cost, the only one that if you used PACE dollars to make the investment and the change, the net benefit to the consumer is $721 a year. To the plus side, they would save that much by having this lower tonnage geothermal system with a very highly insulated home. And again, why is that important? And that's on the next slide. This is the tonnage drop of carbon footprint. Because you eliminate all gas consumption for heat and hot water, you really drop the building's carbon footprints substantially, and that's how you get to net zero. And I was asked yesterday to add something about the data center. So on the next slide is, I have permission from Submer to share this. This is their claim that they deliver with liquid cooled data centers a 1.03 PUE. And next slide. So an existing building could be used to hold many more megawatts and smart pods because of the density of the equipment in the water cooled or liquid cooled system. So what do you do with that in a PACE environment? And that's where I developed the next slide trying to ballpark this, and I don't want to claim it's accurate. I have assumed that they are paying maybe a nickel a kilowatt hour. And what I did was compared an industry average PUE at the time, it's probably 2 years old, might be lower nowadays. But I also looked at whether or not the REIT owns the data center or a non-REIT, and they have other opportunities for tax savings. And so what I feel is that for a 10 megawatt data center, if you're paying the nickel, which is, I assume, more accurate, that if you were a data center owned by a REIT, you could get a $22 million PACE investment to make the change to water-cooled system. And if you think back to the slide I showed you about the more is invested by PACE, the greater returns, I think that applies to data center owners also, but I've not had the privilege of working with any data center users, and that's kind of the next step.
Gerry,
Also,
we're down to 10 minutes. Can you wind it up, Gerry, real quick?
Yeah, this is the last bit is the Submer product also would allow you to put solar on the roof. And so the effective PUE for the building could also drop to less than 1. And next slide is just my contact information should be interested in calling me for any reason.
That's great. Thank you, Gerry, very much. I appreciate it. We only have 10 minutes. I want to open up the chat room or can we open up the mics, Ashley White, if there's any questions at all? I have a couple of questions if the audience does not. Questions? Anyone? Unmute and just speak up. Okay, let me ask mine. This is to me, seems to be a slam dunk commercial business case. So why hasn't PACE been flying off the shelves? Can you guys answer that? What is causing PACE to not be a really, really hot commodity that's flying off the shelves?
Well, for one reason, it has to be approved, and it hasn't been approved in all states. So I think one thing that we didn't share at the beginning of this is that probably people in Loudoun hadn't heard of it because it wasn't approved in Virginia. But Abby could speak a lot more to the national view of why it's taken so long to take off.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I say there's 2 reasons. One, absolutely, there's a process because you have the special assessment component. You have to have a state law that allows it. And then you have to have local governments pass an ordinance or a resolution that enables this ability for a property owner to place a voluntary special assessment on their property. And this all takes time. So in Virginia now, we have 16 localities that have passed a PACE ordinance, but then you have to get them to move to the point where they're willing to actually have a program open and to have a guide and to all agree. And it takes a lot of time. And so that's why having a state option is really exciting, because that's going to speed that up. We've seen in other states that are farther along than Virginia, like Texas or Connecticut or Wisconsin even, or Missouri, they have, it took a long time to kind of get those local governments going, but once they did, and developers and owners could see that, okay, and contractors can see, okay, well, it's open in Loudoun, but not in, Fauquier County. So I work in both places. I'm confused. You really want kind of a geographic continuity for PACE to really be able to be promoted. I also say that, over time, it's been important to get existing mortgage holders to agree to PACE. Is something that is required in most states, including Virginia, that you get the consent of an existing mortgage holder for having PACE placed on the property. And that is because, as I think Gerry said, it is the subordination, this consent is to allow these payments to be senior to the mortgage holders if case of a foreclosure, just the delinquent ones, but that's still a conversation you have to have. Why would I allow something to trump, quote unquote, my mortgage? And it's something that you can get around, but as more banks understand it and want to participate, it's making it easier and easier. So I really think that we have like 60 million in our pipeline right now throughout Virginia, probably more than that. And I think it's really going to be a banner year for the state and for Loudoun.
And if I can just add on, Jen Bingle put a question in chat. Can we put buck slips inside tax bills every year advertising CPACE? And absolutely, we can do that, Jen. We talked about that when we were talking about residential PACE. I talked to the commissioner of revenue, and he said, sure, we do that stuff like that all the time. So that's fairly easy to do, and it's an excellent idea. I will say, as a Ashburn supervisor, when we first started looking at various PACE options, and Abby and I sort of linked up early on as sort of professional colleagues to figure out how we were going to do this. She said, you got to get the county ordinance to align with the state code. And so, which is not hard. And so it was kind of funny because I drafted up a board member initiative to align Loudoun ordinances with the Virginia code. And right after it passed, and I mean, literally the week it passed, the Virginia code was changed. And so I had to introduce a second BMI to re-update the Loudoun ordinance to the new Virginia code, which we did. And one of the things about PACE is because it gets a little bit complicated. If you can make a good 5-minute case from the dais as an elected official, everybody else will go, yeah, that sounds good, because everybody wants to be environmentally smart. So it's not hard to get your local ordinance to align with the Virginia code. And as Abby said, what do we have, Abby, 15 jurisdictions in Virginia?
We have 16 right now, yeah. And hey, hot off the press, I just see we have more legislation updating, adding environmental remediation and clean water improvements and EV infrastructure to be confirmed in code. And it looks like it's gone through at the committee level. So you may have to go back again, Mike.
Really quickly, I just want to go straight to the heart of it. Are there naysayers against CPACE? And if so, what are they using as their arguments to be naysayers?
I think I'll let Karen or Gerry talk to that. I mean,
right. The only headwinds that I have run into are uninformed lenders who just say no. We even had one guy just say, I don't want to have to deal with the paperwork. And I can't hold a gun to my lender's head and say, do the right thing. So that's been the primary headwind is lender issues. And then the other thing is, like, I had a project in Indiana that I desperately wanted to use PACE on, but it's not approved there. And I had to go to another type of program, which has been a huge headache. So, I'm fortunate that a huge part of my portfolio is in Ohio, and Ohio has been an early adopter and a big adopter. I have one PACE financing in Ohio that the rate is 4%. I mean, couldn't have done any better than that. You know, certainly Mez would have been higher. So I guess to answer your question, I've scratched my head as well that why don't people, once they understand it, go after it? But if you're not doing a new development, as I said in my presentation, it sort of has to dovetail time-wise with you needing to do something. Because also it's a fairly decent time and legal fee investment up front. And so it needs to be a decent sized project. You're not going to use PACE to do a $50,000 or $100,000 project. So that's why what I tell everybody I know about it and tell them they should look at it.
Thanks, Karen. And the last one, Gerry, I'm going to throw to you. And my question is, this came up in the residential PACE discussion, but I'm sure it applies in the commercial PACE. You have to do an energy audit before and after, correct? And what's that process? How do you determine what the need is, get an estimate of the project, and how do you determine that the project was delivered, met that need?
Yeah, well, typically for a new client, I just ask for the energy bills and I compare it to national averages for the same type of building or building use, if it's office, hotel, et cetera. And then I look at it and say, look, easily we can cut that in half. This will justify this many PACE dollars. I mean, if you're already using no energy, you're not going to benefit from a PACE project. But if you're using twice the national average, and the worst case I saw was a hotel using 13 times national average down in DC. That gives you a huge PACE and opportunity. In the investment, the allowed investment, which would have been cash flow positive, was a $10 million upgrade for a 140 room hotel. So it was just phenomenal. But anyway, I did want to throw out, Mike, two things, and I'm checking 9:59, 1 minute left. The county could do this on any rental properties that they use as a tenant. They could probably talk to a landlord like Karen and say, can we have a PACE project and can we have geothermal and solar and fix the insulation? I've looked at a couple office buildings in Loudoun, reduce the tonnage from 100 to 60 without trying. This was, and just adding roof insulation. And when you're replacing that kind of way, it's just a big help. And the second thing I wanted to say is perhaps on planning, when we're going through planning efforts and rezoning efforts, requiring some sort of PACE analysis to make it net zero has always been a good idea in my mind, maybe not anybody else's, but I would certainly suggest that be the case.
Yeah, I mean, to
Great.
add on to that,
Go ahead, Karen.
the way I learned about PACE was just what he just described. My tenant came to me and said, we want to do this, but it's a lien on the property. So the landlord, the owner, has to be the one who initiates it. And we worked with them and we got a big lease extension because we said, you're going to have a lease long enough to pay back the financing. So it was really positive for us. And it was great for them. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much. We are on the hour and we've had 18 participants start to finish. That's a good webinar. I'm pleased with that. One final thing, Ashley White, how can they get a copy of the presentation?
So we will email out the presentation to everyone, as well as a copy of the recording to make sure you didn't miss anything.
Great. Thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate your consideration and your attendance and your interest, and we will make this available to you at your request. Thank you all very much. Have a
Thanks,
great
everybody.
morning.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Great
you.
to see all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.